Thank you everyone for joining our session today on income protection for realtors. I realize everyone here is challenged for time with these markets. You're busy folks, so we'll try and keep this short and sweet. This is me, Satu. I am an executive consultant with IG Wealth Management, and I'm joined today by my guest from RBC Insurance and one of my partners, Chris. Maybe you'd like to just say hello.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Chris Cook with RBC Insurance. I'm a senior sales consultant here and work to support Satu in all the insurance business that he does.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So without further ado, I'll take the first part of the presentation. It'll really focus on kind of the considerations we think about as a financial planner for our clients and how income protection comes into it. I work with a fair amount of realtors, which is why this session was organized. But I'll just go back to the basics. And, everyone thinks of a financial plan as being all about investments, and it really isn't. It's actually about your financial well-being. And, that can have multiple quadrants. We talk about it in 6 dimensions, where it is about obviously managing your cash flow if you're a business owner, where it can be about optimizing your retirement. That's obviously one of the well-known things around financial planning. But really, one of the forgotten aspects is preparing for the unexpected, which is about protecting, preserving, and ensuring that your loved ones have a future. And that's what today's session is about. But when we create a living plan, when I create a living plan, that's the areas we look at. And in terms of the approach, like I said, these are the key areas that we look at. And today, as I said, we're going to talk about insurance and whether you have, it's not insurance for the sake of it. You'll all have seen the policy me and other things. You'll all have some kind of group insurance coverage, but it's really assessing your needs. That's what I do, which is about assessing, do you have enough to keep you secure during an unexpected plan? Is there a risk to your overall plan and financial future from unexpected events? And we do it all through the living plan assessment, which is an IG proprietary piece of software. Rather than talk too much about it, it is around the entire financial picture. It talks about, it does what if scenarios. So what if you live longer? What if the market crashes? And really, what we find is that creating a plan makes investing as well as any financial decisions you make a lot easier to handle.
Planning a solid financial future is more complex than ever, leaving us to navigate our way with what-if questions.
What if we sold the house in the city and moved up here?
What if the market drops?
Or what if we outlive our savings?
Imagine a holistic plan that allows you to consider and adjust for every possible scenario. At IG Wealth Management, we call this the living plan. Does your plan answer all your what-if questions? Introducing the next generation of financial planning.
So that was a little plug for the living plan. But in terms of what we do, we work, as Chris said, with insurance providers around life, disability, critical illness. We're not going to talk about all of that. We've also got lending and banking solutions. So it's not just about investments, is the point I wanted to make. We've obviously got some sort of emergency here, so excuse me while I just talk briefly about insurance needs analysis. And this is the part that I'm passionate about, because I often come across people who say, oh, how much will a life insurance cost? Or I have mortgage insurance, or whatever it is. And the key is actually assessing what do you need first before you decide what you want to pay for it or how much you want to spend on it. And this sort of pie chart really talks about the different sorts of insurance. You'll have heard of all of these. So life insurance can be of two sorts. There's disability insurance, which is what our key focus will be, and Chris will talk to this today, but also critical illness, long-term care, with all of us living longer. And it's interesting in that, each has its place. Each has its place in your stage of life and where you're at. That said, as I said, we're going to focus on this for today, which is around income protection. Critical illness as well, we'll cover in a later session. And I will just hand over to Chris at this point.
Thanks, Satu, and thanks everyone for having me. Satu, I really liked the video that you showed, and really the focus being on a plan for living. And a lot of that plan comes down to not only the investment side of things, but also protecting your income too, in case the unexpected happens. And this is what this part of the presentation is all about, is what can you do to protect yourself if something were to happen and maybe you can't go to work tomorrow, or maybe you can't go to work for the next few years, or even for the rest of your career. What plan do you have in place? Being a realtor, self-employed, you eat what you kill. So oftentimes you need to be out there selling, prospecting, working with clients in order to generate that income. And sometimes life can be unexpected, and it's about what plans we have in place to protect us if and when that happens. So Satya, if you flip ahead, we won't take long, but for maybe the next 15 minutes or so, we wanted to touch on really what that plan could be, and really it's focused around a disability. So what can you do to protect yourself if something happens to you where you can't work? And we'll get into what are the chances of this happening based on the stats we have today. What are people claiming for? Then also touch a bit on, what's the right plan for you as a sales professional out there working in the real estate industry. So why don't we just jump right into it and talk about what is a disability? When we say the word disability or disability insurance, what are we talking about? Well, oftentimes we'll often think of injuries. Oh, well, a car accident, I hurt my back, I'm disabled. It's a lot more than that, though. When we think of a disability, especially when it comes to insurance, it can really be any serious illness or injury that leaves you unable to work. So the idea behind insurance is that it's an attempt to help you maintain your lifestyle while you're going through a pretty difficult period. Again, it's not just injury related. It could be medical. It could be an illness you're suffering from, whether it's an illness to your body, a major illness such as cancer or a heart attack or even stroke, or even a mental one. All of that counts. It's essentially kind of an all encapsulating anything that makes you unable to work that's confirmed by a doctor. Now, when we look at what the common causes of disability are today, what's interesting with this data is some of it even caught me off guard when I saw it for the first time. The big one is mental illness or a mental disorder. It's the largest claim for us. And you'll see these stats go up to 2017. More recent data is showing that mental illness bucket is actually growing. It's about a third of all new claims right now. And when you look at injuries account for about 14%, so still important. But of course, mental illness, musculoskeletal would be conditions of the back, any sort of ligament, anything of that nature, which is also a big bucket. And you'll see as well, that age doesn't really matter. It's hitting all of us, whether we're under 40, 40 to 49 or beyond. We really can suffer a disability at any time. And when we talk about a disability, we're not necessarily talking about something where you can't work for a week or two. It really is something where you're going to be incapacitated for 3 months or more. That's kind of the benchmark we use. Now, mental health. It's worth talking about this because it's very topical these days. It's becoming more and more talked about. We're more comfortable talking about things like depression and anxiety than we were in the past. And it's becoming, well, a greater source when it comes to insurance of planning around it and addressing this at a claim. You'll see some of the top sources of stress, well, burnout. We see that a lot, especially in light of COVID-19, working long hours. Finances, of course, play a role in the stress that we have, and increased work hours and workload. And what's a little bit telling and scary is that the number of people who've had disability insurance has gone down by about 11% since pre-COVID days. So we have more depression, more anxiety than we do, but we're not protecting ourselves. And so that's a telling story where really the attempt of what Satu and I are trying to do here is bring some awareness to this so that you can develop a plan today to protect you for the future. If you flip ahead, Satu. This is telling as well as just the growth in mental health claims, and probably not all that surprising, especially with everything we've experienced going through a pandemic for, well, most of us, if not all of us, the very first time, and adjusting to a new lifestyle, a new way of doing business. For you as realtors, a lot of adjustment in that for a certain period of time, at least in 2020, a lot of what you were doing was virtual and not in person. So trying to sell a home to a client over the phone or FaceTime or Zoom or whatever platform, I can imagine the challenge that is and the difficulties you face. And I certainly sympathize with you there. And all that adds to the mental health risk that we see in the industry and the fact that it is certainly on the rise. And we have some very timely information. This actually just came up today in a news feed of mine that spoke to just a surge in absent workers. And a lot of this due to not only illness, but disability as well. So this is since COVID-19 has struck. You'll see the line there, which is the pre-COVID-19 average. And across almost every single industry, we're seeing a surge in absences. A lot of times absences that aren't optional or the choice of the individual. So it is due to an illness or a disability. And again, it comes down to, is there financial protection in place if you do suffer that disability? So how are you going to protect yourself financially if you are one of those who can't work for a long period of time? And if you skip ahead, Satu. So let's talk about what the risk is. The risk varies by age, but this slide again was really telling the first time I saw it. So I'm 40. I consider myself to be a healthy male. Don't really ever imagine myself suffering a disability, but based on the data we have, it shows I've got about a 45% chance of something happening to me where I won't be able to work for 90 days or more. That's telling. I can't imagine what that would be, but at the end of the day, I've got another 20, 25 years of work ahead of me. When I look at how much I've changed since I was 15 to 40, maybe that is sort of a sign of the risk being there. I certainly don't recover from exercising as quickly as I used to, a little harder to get up in the morning. And so knowing that these illnesses as well can strike at any time, cancer, heart attack, or stroke, sometimes the best plan you can have for that is the financial one, and it's how you're going to protect yourself. And you see the average duration on the bottom. Well, for a 45-year-old, it's 2.8 years. For a 50-year-old, it's 3.1 years. So that average time is how long you're off work. And I have an emergency fund, and as I imagine many of you do as well. I can get by if I can't work for 6 months or so. But beyond that, now it becomes a pretty difficult situation to be in. I've got a mortgage that I need to pay for, a lot of fixed expenses every month. And I can keep that going for a certain period of time, but certainly not indefinitely, and certainly not for 3 years without any income coming in. Now, when we look at the perception, I suppose, versus reality of what happens when you're disabled, is that when you're healthy and working, ideally you generate a strong income, and it's enough to cover your expenses and maybe put a little bit away to savings, perhaps by working with Satu and doing a holistic financial plan and putting something away towards retirement. Well, what if you can't work? What happens? Well, what we tend to see is a shrinking of income. Disability insurance can protect that. It's going to insulate you from that income going down. With disability insurance, we're not always protecting 100% of what you made before, but we're protecting a good percentage of that, 75%, for instance. Now, when you're disabled, you might see expenses balloon because now there's these added costs that you have. Maybe it's rehab costs. Maybe it's physio. Maybe it's modifications to the home because you need some assistance in your home when it comes to some of the basic daily activities of living, feeding, getting out of bed. You also see debt increasing as a result of this. And then finally, because debt's increasing, you see your savings that are shrinking. So all of that creates a perfect storm of just a bad situation for anyone to be in. And the best way to protect yourself against that is to have some sort of insurance in place. I find with insurance, there's a lot of known. What insurance allows you to do is you know the cost of it. You know how much you're going to get. But what you don't know is the if and the when. You don't know if something is going to happen and you don't know when. You can't plan around that. You can't necessarily plan for a disability to happen. So one of the key ways to protect yourself is to have insurance in place so that it addresses the unknown, the if and the when. The next slide, again, speaks to how telling the risk is to us as Canadians in that we are more debt driven than we used to. We're not saving as much as we used to. Now, in 2020, when the pandemic hit, there was a rise in savings among Canadians. But at the end of the day, we are still debt driven, in large part because of the mortgages we have and real estate values in Canada, well, especially in Vancouver. So you'll see there $177 for every $100 of disposable income. So how are you going to finance that $177 if you're disabled? Where's that money going to come from so that you can pay for that mortgage, your cell phone, your cable bill, your utilities, your groceries, so that you have food on the table? And for some of you, the argument might be, well, you know, I'm self-insured. I've got other properties that I'm invested in. I've got a large savings. Maybe with Satu, you've developed a portfolio where you have an RRSP and a TFSA, and you have a large retirement savings that you've built up, and say, well, you know what, if I get disabled, I'll just dip into that. Well, we put this slide together to just kind of illustrate why insurance might still matter to you. And so we looked at 3 scenarios. We took a 40-year-old male with a $1 million portfolio, and we looked at a number of things that could happen. Number one, we looked at what if nothing happens and you don't buy any insurance and it grows by 5% a year. You'll have about $3.4 million when you retire at 65. Now, what if you bought insurance? What's that going to cost you? Well, it'll cost you a little bit per month. You'll see your long-term savings drop to about $3.26 million. So it costs you about 3.8% of that future potential growth. But then we looked at 3 scenarios where you didn't have insurance. And let's say you suffered a disability when you're 41. And couldn't work for 3 years. So you're pulling $200,000 from that $1 million portfolio in order to finance your living while you're disabled. What happens, even if you're only out for 3 years, you go back to work when you're 44, what happens to that retirement portfolio? Well, it's only worth $1.45 million when you retire. You've lost 57% of that growth potential. And we all know the value of compound growth. So that erodes that long-term growth potential by having to dip into it at a young age. Well, what if you're 46? It's still 45%. What if you get disabled when you're 51? You're only 15 years away from retirement. You've still lost over a third of what you could have had if you had had some sort of insurance in place so that you don't need to dip into that retirement portfolio. Get RBC Insurance as an insurance company to pay your income instead of you paying for it out of your own pocket.
And if I can just interject for a bit, Chris, because this slide really speaks to me in terms of the planning option as well. And it's, as you said, it's the known. The known is the 3.8% cost of that insurance. And it's something we do in investments. I mean, all our clients have some kind of bond allocation. It's not because bonds pay money, it's just for protection. And this slide, it's truly telling in terms of, you know, what might be a simple event having a huge lasting impact.
That's such a good point. Thanks, Satu. So we'll finish off and just touch on, well, what's the right plan for you as a realtor? There's a lot of options out there. RBC Insurance isn't the only option either. But we'll at least address or give you an example of what you could look at and what we'd suggest would probably be the right plan for you as a sales professional. That would really be 2 plans that we call at RBC, the professional plan or the foundation plan. Now, they're product names that we use internally, but at the end of the day, what this plan is a strong contract that is geared towards the professional market. Fee for service, sales professionals, high income earners, such as yourselves that are online today. And it provides long-term income protection. With these plans, we're really looking at giving you coverage all the way up to 65. And when you see the contract type, what we mean by non-cancelable is that the insurance company cannot cancel it on you. We can't change the terms of that contract once you have it all the way to 65. So in an industry where your income is variable and it can vary year by year depending on market conditions and the clientele you have, you might see some great years and some not so great years. What a non-cancelable disability plan like the professional or foundation plan can do is lock in your benefit, maybe at a high water mark, given how the market's been over the last few years. You lock it in when your income's high so that if you do get disabled in the future and you're not earning as much as you did before, if you're totally disabled, you still get the benefit amount that you bought today. So it guarantees you, it gives you confidence that that benefit amount that you've purchased is what you'll get paid when you are disabled. That's not necessarily the case for all disability plans out there. And then when we say regular occupation, what we mean is if you can't do your job as a realtor and you're under the care of a doctor and you're not working anywhere else, we consider you to be disabled. There are other plans where we'd look at an any occupation definition where we'd say, well, okay, maybe you can't be a realtor, but what other job could you do out there based on your education and training and experience? So really what we're trying to do is suggest a very strong disability plan for you, given that you're sales professionals and high income earners. Now, disabilities aren't all black and white. There's also a gray area where maybe you're kind of disabled. Maybe you're still working a bit, but not as much as you used to. Perhaps it is a mental illness claim where you're burnt out, but you still want to be engaged in the marketplace and work to a certain extent. Well, there are some options that you can use within these contracts, partial as well as residual being two of them. And what those do is if you can't work part of the time, and your income is decreased because of that, the insurance policy is still going to pay you part of the income or 50%. So it's kind of working in conjunction with you where you work to the extent that you can, you're still going to get some income from your insurance policy. So that's the idea behind disability. It's meant to evolve with you as your disability evolves so that it's not just cut and dry, it's not black and white. And if we move on to examples, we wanted to show you just what you'd be looking at in terms of costs. And again, these are just examples. I encourage you to reach out to Satu and go through this with him and really work with him. He'll of course uncover your needs and recommend the right plan for you. But at the very least, this gives you an example of what you could expect by way of cost. At $100,000 and a 35-year-old male non-smoker, you could look at a disability plan that's going to insure you for up to $5,200 per month. Now that's tax-free. That's non-taxable. You're getting $5,200 per month into your bank account every month, no taxes included. Now we looked at what that would be as far as income replacement goes. Earning $100,000 per year, you're looking at almost $6,600 in take-home pay after taxes. Based on the average Canadian or marginal tax rate, certainly you might be able to write off more than the average person, so you might be taking home a different amount. But if we use that as an example, it's 79% of income. Now, in terms of cost, what are we looking at? Well, $126.94 a month. That's only 1.5% of your take-home pay. And better yet, we actually have a discount in place for most realtors in the industry where we give them a 15% discount. That premium factors the discount into it. But rest assured that for most of you, you're likely getting a very good disability plan at a pretty decent discount as well. So what about a 35-year-old female non-smoker? What will we be looking at? There we go. And it says 45 up there. It's actually a 35-year-old female that we quoted for this one. And you'll see again, $5,200 in disability coverage. The monthly premium for that, $215.18. So you're looking at 2.6% of your take-home pay. You'll see that's a little bit higher than males. It's interesting with insurance. Females have a higher morbidity risk or disability risk than males, but they have a longer life expectancy. So if you're doing a full financial plan with Satu, you might find your life insurance premium to be less expensive than a male, but your disability premium, unfortunately, is more expensive than a male. So we looked at another scenario and said, well, what if you earn $250,000 and you're a 45-year-old male non-smoker? Well, in this scenario, we'd be offering disability coverage of up to $10,000 per month. Again, non-taxable. That's about 74% of your take-home pay. What's that going to cost you? $403.99. It's only 1.9% of your income. So again, a small percentage of your income to protect yourself against a large catastrophic risk. That's really what we do with insurance. You're protecting yourself against the unknown by taking a known cost that you can build into your financial plan with Satu. And again, 15% discount. Finally, 45-year-old female non-smoker. You'd be looking at a monthly premium of $577.34. So 2.8% of your take-home pay. In every single one of these scenarios, you'll see we're looking at a percentage that's really under 3% of your take-home pay for all of these plans. So that's the idea here, a small cost today in order to protect yourself against a very large cost and a catastrophic risk to you in the future.
Chris, just to interject again, but going back to the plan, and I find this fascinating because, as we've shown, the costs are anything from 2 to 2.5%, just under 2 to 2.5. If you recall when we talked about the plan, the impact on your savings, on your assets, it was about 3.8%. And I think it's worth highlighting to people that what we've done is accounted for the fact that there's a lack of future growth of what you've paid as premium. But it is still, even on your assets, it's a fraction of the negative impact, which was 57% or thereabouts. So.
That's such a good point. Yeah, I completely agree, Satu. And then you can focus on your investments and allow those to grow. And the other thing too is the risk of pulling out money before you're ready to, maybe at a point where the market isn't doing so well. So now you're pulling out from your savings in a down market, and how catastrophic that would be to you long term. So the insurance gives you the freedom and peace of mind to not have to do that.
100%. And that speaks to the fact that you could do my job perfectly well, Chris, because that
hardly.
I'll just I just wanted to, so thank you for that, Chris, because it was as Chris said, those are just examples, everything. We don't talk generalities in our practice and what we do. It's your specific situation, but that'll give you a good idea of the kind of costs. I just wanted to go through some of the tips because this is some of the stuff that I bug Chris with when looking at cases, to help the client really. And some of the factors to take into account. I mean, one is, the first point is not particularly relevant because you don't tend to have as a realtor employer provided plan, but even if you did, it's often a starting point, not the end point. But really, the next few points are the ones we wanted to talk about because this is where working with a planner is relevant because it's not just a quote. You can get a elimination period which is shorter. The elimination period is the 90 days that Chris talked about. It's when the benefits start kicking in. You have to be disabled for that period before it starts kicking in. Well, it has an impact on premium. So you can have a 30-day or a 60-day elimination, which sounds better, but it may be that the cost of the premium outweighs the benefit of the extra 30 or 60 days of the disability income. And that's particularly pertinent because you can keep an emergency fund. Chris talked about, I'd like to have your emergency fund of a year, Chris, but you can, and that's where working with a planner is relevant because you don't have to go with the most expensive. You just have to go with what's right for you. And the same, Chris touched upon the own job versus, the regular occupation versus any occupation. And it's particularly relevant for, roles like realtors, because if you think about it, or financial planner, there are some qualifications and skills, but, if I can't do financial planning, I'd be told to do pretty much anything, right? I mean, desk-bound job. And that's not necessarily what I want. It's a very different, income and the rest of it. So it is like long-term disability with having regular occupation as your benefit period. Chris mentioned as well about locking in good years. It also can be you're at the start of your career, so you want to have the option of growing the benefit, which is possible with some policies, as well as indexing to inflation. I mean, I think everyone is familiar with inflation right now after years of being in the doldrums. It is relevant, and so you can build in cost of living options as well along your period. And obviously, the last bit is where the needs analysis comes in. I hate seeing, if you do a life insurance, it's normally 100,000 or 200,000 or a million. Everyone does round numbers. We don't, because again, it should be based on what your needs are and what your plan says your needs are, and then the premium just works out. So. Just some tips, to follow on from Chris's points. And before we end up here, I wanted to cover this slide, which is about RBC insurance, because as an independent planner, we work with multiple insurance providers. So I work with Canada Life and others. RBC Insurance has been a newish partner, When did you enter the market, Chris, in terms of life and the other products?
I believe, Satu, it was 2017, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds about right, because it's
Yeah.
just before I started my career here with IG. But yes, and you know, the interesting thing for me, it's as a new provider, you know, there's insurance it's all about the underwriting and having the capital reserves to meet all the, you know, all the payouts. RBC has that, so the strength, it's a given. You know, it's always given. What I really appreciate is the value. So, you know, for example, Chris talked about the industry discounts for realtors, which is part of the reason we partnered with RBC to bring you this. So, you know, it's always been good value. As a new entrant, obviously also RBC is trying to garner market share, but doing it in a sustainable way, which I appreciate. But the single most important thing is the advice. You know, when we're looking at placing a policy, which is some complicated needs, realtors fall into that category. It's the ability to engage in a meaningful dialogue about what's right for the client, you know, what fits, which again, you know, Chris and his team are brilliant at doing. So that's why RBC Insurance. And you know, it's funny me talking about it because this should be Chris's slide, but I wanted to take it. So that's, you know, that's why we should, you know, we would look at RBC Insurance as one of the leading partners for us when doing disability. Um, I think that brings us very nicely to the question and answer session. And we're going to do this on a recorded basis as well. So we'll pick up your questions as you have them in the chat, and one of us will get back to you and respond to you on that basis. Um, Anything else you want to add in parting, Chris?
No, I think you nailed it, Satya. I think it was a great way to end the presentation, and really just thank everyone for their time today and for listening to us and getting a better understanding of just what the risks are to you as self-employed sales professionals, and also what you can do to protect yourself.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. And we are, you know, you have our contact information. Feel free to, you know, reach out to get a 30-minute discussion around what your needs might be before we do a deep dive. I always encourage discussion before, you know, to assess your needs before going into quotes and the rest of it, which we can do. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate the time you spent on sharing your knowledge with us. And we look forward to speaking to some of you. Bye,
Thank
Chris.
you.
Bye.